The Snake Bracelet is the newest epic equipment in Clash of Clans, and today we're going to be giving you all the details about this piece of equipment, talk about its stats profile, talk about how it matches up against other pieces of barbarian equipment, and of course we're going to go over its synergy. And guys, trust me, you want to stick around because we're going to be revealing some hidden stats for the Snake Bracelet in this video. Getting into the details of this equipment, you can buy it for 3,100 snake medals in the event shop. The special event of this equipment is that it spawns snakes when the barbarian king takes damage. Now this is a super arbitrary measure. What does taking damage even mean, and can you measure that? Don't worry guys, I did some extensive testing in the developer build and here's what I found. First, I tested if the equipment would spawn snakes even if the king did not take any damage, and as you guys can see in the background, you do not get any snakes if the king doesn't take any damage. I further reaffirmed this test by having the king go against the isolated Expo, and as you guys can see, he takes consistent damage, so he spawns consistent snakes. The next question to ask is whether the degree of damage affects the amount of snakes that you actually spawn. To test this, I put the king against a monolith, and as you guys can see, when the king takes a huge monolith shot, he spawns multiple snakes at a single time. I wanted to test this one more time with a different defense, and I used the scatter shot, and we got pretty similar results with the king spawning multiple snakes. What this tells us is that it doesn't really matter whether the king is taking damage from a single defense or from multiple defenses. The most important thing is how much damage is actually coming in. I also found out that it doesn't matter the rate of the damage because you're still going to get all of your snakes, as you guys can see from this single target inferno test right here. Now logically, our next question is going to be exactly how much damage does the king have to take for him to be able to spawn a single snake. To test this, I put the king against an Expo once again for 30 seconds and found out that he was able to spawn 22 snakes. This particular Expo has a DPS of 225. Doing some quick maths, we can actually figure out that that is one snake every 306 damage, but it is likely rounded to about 300 damage. Now this is a really cool and unique feature that isn't present with any other equipment in the game, and it's helped out by the fact that the Snake Bracelet will actually give the king some extra HP as well. There are also important things to consider when it comes to synergy, but I'm going to save that for later in the video. With the ability description out of the way, let's take a look in depth at the stats for this equipment. The equipment gives a passive ability to spawn snakes, and when you upgrade it, the snake level increases. I'm not going to analyze the level and the HP and the DPS of the snakes because each single snake is rather insignificant. You also get a passive boost to the DPS, hit points, and attack speed of the king. Now the attack speed is really interesting. When we compare it to the max vamp stash, it is less than that, but it still is a decent boost. The hit point increase, however, is best in class because it's going to give you more hit points than the spiky ball and more hit points than the barbarian puppet. Now I didn't graph any of these upgrades because as you guys can see from the gameplay in the background, everything is rather linear. What I was interested in though is whether the damage required for snake spawn changed with the equipment level. What I found was that the damage and the rate of the level 1 Snake Bracelet was relatively the same, but the snakes stopped spawning after a while. I tested this with the single target Inferno, and it was pretty clear that there was a distinction in the number of snakes that were actually spawned. This is pretty bizarre to me because there's clearly a distinction in the number of snakes spawned, and I'm wondering why that's not included in the stats window. I mean, it's not like we didn't have any room in the interface or anything like that. And just to further demonstrate this point, this is a split screen of a level 1 versus a level 9 Snake Bracelet and the amount of snakes that they spawn, and this next split screen is between level 9 and level 18 Snake Bracelets and the amount of snakes that they spawn, and clearly there's a big difference. I mean, yeah, the hit point increase and other passive increases are huge on this equipment, but the amount of snakes spawned is really the thing that gives this equipment its power, and I'm not sure why we wouldn't include that in the interface. Regardless, because snakes get stronger and you get more snakes, leveling up is huge for this piece of equipment. Okay, now with the stats out of the way, what is the optimum way to use the Snake Bracelet? I will admit that I don't have extensive hours of testing on this equipment, but it's pretty easy to see that the main utility of this equipment is to get as many snakes onto the base as possible. The issue with the snakes, however, is that they're very weak and they absolutely melt to pretty much any type of splash damage. Because of this, I think any attack where you could get a ton of shielding for your snakes could potentially be very good. When I think of this, I'm thinking of things like ground spam attacks or maybe even smash strategies. And if you have some snakes left towards the end of your attack, they can actually be pretty useful for some cleanup, which is really nice. Also, just so you guys know, every snake that is spawned costs a single housing space. So if you use the clone spell, you can actually get a ton of snakes on the base, and this could be another potential way for us to attack with the snake bracelet. So there are some uses for this equipment, but I do have to say that it feels rather underwhelming and a little bit inconsistent due to how weak the snakes are. Despite this, let's see if there's any synergy combinations that work really well. Now originally, because of the fact that we know snakes spawn every 300 damage, we would ideally want the most amount of hit points for our Barbarian King. But from the levels analysis, we were able to show that hit points don't really matter if your equipment level isn't high enough in the first place. So the amount of hit points that you passively get as a boost is not as important. This bummed me out a little bit because I was thinking something like the Vamp Stash could be really good synergy wise, because it would allow the king to heal and hopefully spawn some more snakes. Despite this, they actually do pretty well together because the added attack speed bonus from the snake bracelet actually applies to the benefit of the Vamp Stash. And I mentioned earlier that the snakes could be useful on cleanup or just to take out some buildings on the outside. So I could see this being a useful bit of synergy, especially because the boosts from both pieces of equipment really benefit each other. Now because the bracelet spawns snakes based on the amount of damage received, I was wondering if the giant gauntlet's damage reduction would affect this at all. From my testing and what I could see, the giant gauntlet actually slows down the spawn rate of the snakes. Now my first thought was that clearly this is terrible and it has bad synergy. But upon thinking about it further, I guess you could be strategic to slow down the spawning of your snakes if you wanted to around a splash damage or something like that. Regardless, I think the equipment combination is situational and I don't think it's good synergy. When it comes to the spiky ball, pretty much anything can synergize with it, so this one is a good combination, especially if you use the spiky ball to maybe get rid of some splash defenses to help the survivability of your snakes. When it comes to the Rage Vial, there's actually some pretty good synergy because the Rage allows the Barbarian King to get in front of the snakes, and that allows him to tank for them, which helps out quite a bit. And last but not least, we have the Barbarian Puppet, which, you know, isn't endgame equipment or anything, but it's kind of funny how you can literally summon an entire army of barbarians and snakes with the click of a button. So there is some decent synergy with this equipment. But with all that being said and done, all the synergies discussed, all the hidden stats revealed, what is the verdict on this equipment? To be honest, I don't think it's a terrible piece of equipment. I would definitely prefer it over something like the Barbarian Puppet, for example, but I don't think it's nearly as good as the Spiky Ball, and it even seems a little bit underwhelming compared to the Earthquake Boots. And the main reason for this is consistency. It's either going to require a ton of skill or a lot of luck to make sure that your snakes end up in the right spot. I think the equipment has a lot of potential, and I'm really curious to see how pro attackers develop strategies with it. Overall, I would rate it a so-so equipment, especially because you really need high levels on it before you can start to see a lot of those snakes spawning at once. When comparing this equipment to the Spiky Ball, it's really no comparison. The Spiky Ball is easy and immediate damage. This is why I recommended players buy the Spiky Ball if they don't have it already instead of the Snake Bracelet. And if you don't want to miss out on quality tips like that and you want to make sure that you spend your snake medals in the right way, then you need to watch this video right here where I break down the best rewards packages for both free-to-play players and spenders.